now reached Super Saiyan Rose.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hekatior V6. Quick recap, in V5 I extrapolated the energetic quality of all 27 triple focuses, credit to Catherine Foover for tri-type, and understandably, as a sign of respect to Catherine Foover's work, I'm not gonna share the data. I also made a meaningful distinction between Hekatior from MBTI and Socionics, and talked about how neuroses affect introverts. I also released some video analysis typing Aubrey Plaza, Carl Jung, Jordan Peterson, the Bottes duo sisters, as well as Mike Tyson. Those analyses provide you a practical example of the difference between brain types and certain nuances when it comes to typing people in Hekatior. You will find a link to Hekatior V5 as well to the Hekatior playlist containing the analysis of the people that I mentioned in description if you haven't watched them already. Now we can move to Hekatior V6. I think it's important to highlight some notes when it comes to the Hindbrain, especially now that some time passed by and I typed much more people since back then. Remember, Hekatior is a relatively new system. Anyways, when it comes to typing someone in Hekatior and tracking the Hindbrain, I find it easier to focus first on whatever triggers the preferential response, since there is a strong correlative pattern between the response regulation in the hindbrain and the gut center. I think it's worth mentioning that the main triggering element in the hindbrain triggering stack might not be always crystal clear obvious. Catherine Foover found out the existence of different proportions in the instinctual stackings. The data suggests that the observations of Catherine Foover are right. First, I'm gonna add to Hekatior an additional trick, which is not meant to be used as primary for typing, but more of a observation that can be added at times. Anyone has the three elements of guard, organizational, and deep twinship in the hindbrain triggering stack. In case you have a person with the main triggering element being strongly predominant over anything else, then that one will be called in Hekatior as the skyscraper pattern, as a skyscraper towering above a landscape of smaller buildings. If the person has this pattern, then it's very clear what is the triggering element in the person. If the person has two triggering elements very close, with one being the main one, this pattern would be called in Hekatior as the twin pattern, and the trickiest to detect the main trigger would be the ones they have a ondulatory effect, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 constantly. That one would be called the third set effect in Hekatior. So yeah, keep in mind some people are harder to pinpoint in the main triggering element than others. However, you will know when it's the main triggering element because that's the one that is more visceral than the other two in the hindbrain triggering stack. Remember how in the Enneagram the secondary pattern with the instinct is when they have a point stuck with each center? Don't get trolled by that effect and then mistype the person to have the hindbrain with the surface level impression if the person doesn't happen to be a gut main core. Remember in typing in Hekatior what triggers chiefly response, the preferential response, and the intensity. I'm not talking of the secondary pattern in the Enneagram, but I'm pointing rather to the first, immediate visceral pattern. Keep that in mind, or you might get thrown off at times if you're just tracking the response and the person is not a gut main core. It's the holistic part that is the one that determines if someone is a type or not a type. Now, that being said, since the Hindbrain part in Hekatior is strongly connected with the gut center in the Enneagram, I mean, using Enneagram microexpression, which are emotional based, by the way, I think it's fair as a potential indicator. I see potential. It's not the decisive factor. The more indicators you see of a type in the Enneagram, the higher the likelihood. But it's the psychological structure of motivation that determines if someone is an Enneagram type or not. Idealized image, core fears, defensive strategy, and so on. Okay? When it comes to the subjective part, microexpression have no meaning whatsoever. Speaking of which, in Hekatior, for the subjective part, I bring with me what's proven correct by the data, and in the process, I discard what's been proven wrong. So, Hekatior is an expansion. One more thing to wrap up. You might have heard about the concept of reduced affect display in psychology. In such cases, also called as emotional blunting or emotional numbing, the individual manifests a reduced emotional reactivity, and it manifests as a failure to express feelings verbally or non-verbally, especially when talking about issues that would normally be expected to engage emotions. Gestures are rare in this condition, and there is little animation in facial expression or vocal inflection. A reduced affect display can be symptomatic of autistic spectrum disorder, schizophrenia, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, depersonalization, derealization, schizoid personality disorder, or brain damage. It can also be triggered by certain medication, such as antipsychotics and antidepressants. Reduced affect display can be categorized in three main subtypes: the constricted affect, in which there is a reduction in an individual's expressive range and intensity of emotional responses; the blunted and flat affect. Blunted is a lack of affect that is more severe than the constricted affect, but less severe than the flattened affect. A person with flat affect or flattened affect has no or nearly not emotional expressions. The person may not react at all at circumstances that usually evoke strong emotions in others. A person with blunted affect, on the other hand, has a significantly reduced intensity in emotional expressions. Notice that also there is a version called shallow affect that is essentially an equivalent of the blunted affect, and it's apparently a common attribute of psychopathy according to Psychopathy Checklist Factor 1. I think it's fair to keep in mind when you see someone that has a blunted or a flattened affect, will be harder on average to type than someone without it. Now, that's not an automatic indicator the person has neuroticism or whatever. As I mentioned before, there are many possible causes. Please avoid to discriminate someone because the person is a flat affect or a blunted affect or whatever, but be aware that the person will be harder to type on average when you see that kind of affects in the person's face. That's it for today. Hope you enjoyed this video. I really find it informative. Stay tuned for more.